Hello everybody, welcome back. Congratulations, you've made it to the end. This is our final lesson and I'm going to try to make it a quick one, okay? In this lesson we're going to talk about some best practices that you can follow to improve the effectiveness of your teaching, right? Particularly if you're a new instructor. So we've broken these down, as the overview will show, into a few topics. First, we're going to talk about best practices for the classroom, followed by best practices that relate to assignments, those that relate to assessment or evaluating students, giving them feedback. We're going to bring in some core practices that ACTFL, you'll remember them from lesson 3, that ACTFL recommends. And then finally, just some general practices for structuring and implementing and carrying out your class. So those are our topics for lesson 8, our final lesson. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so let's begin with some of the best practices for the language classroom. And again, these are not universal laws. These are just some things that we sat around with some experienced language instructors and we came up with things that have worked for us and we would recommend. So in the classroom, some best practices. Conduct your class in the target language, even at the lowest levels. Students need rich, comprehensible input, and it's your job to provide it. So avoid English. Try to make yourself understood in the target language. Dedicate most of your class time, as I've said multiple times, to interactive student-centered activities that require users, learners, to use the language to negotiate meaning in authentic ways. Encourage your students to communicate as much as possible, right? Focus on communication, interaction, and meaning. Don't fixate on grammar forms or accuracy. If you fixate in the classroom on grammatical accuracy, your students are going to be afraid to say or write anything. Get them communicating. So, implement, actually you don't have a choice. We're going to implement this for you. The flipped classroom model, right? Have students study and learn vocab and grammar before class and use class sessions to practice. And then finally, don't spend significant time in class lecturing or explaining grammar or other concepts that students can learn outside. This goes with the flipped model. But if a question can be addressed quickly, do so. Absolutely. Otherwise, clarify after class or suggest resources to the student. All right, what about regarding assignments, right? Those things that we have students do usually outside of class. What are some best practices? Well, create purposeful assignments, right, that align with your course objectives. Don't overload students with busy work. They are busy. They have 4 or 5 classes. Your class is important, but it's not their life. So help them by making your assignments purposeful, right? Think of your assignments as formative assessments. So try to assign things that are preparing students, taking them along that path of progress toward the summative assessments. So when using the online component, right, you don't have to assign everything. Review the activities and carefully select those that are going to be the most helpful. Remember, sometimes less is more. Now, many of these will already be assigned by the basic language program coordinator, but you can also assign activities in the online component. But review them carefully. Make sure there's a reason for asking your students to complete them. When you give an assignment, make sure that it comes with very clear instructions. And let students know how that assignment's going to be evaluated. Share the criteria. Another really good idea is to give students, if it's an assignment that you've used before, show students examples, right? Good examples and bad examples. All right, so what about assessments or evaluation, providing feedback? Here are some best practices along those lines, right? We want to send a clear signal to students in terms of what they should focus on. So use high-stakes summative assessments to do that, right? That's why the assessments in our program are worth 50% of the syllabus. We get what we assess. If we don't assess something, students won't invest time and energy in it. Use rubrics to evaluate, rubrics or scoring guides to evaluate those assessments. They're going to help you provide faster and even more objective feedback to students. And like I mentioned in the previous screen, right, there's no reason to hide this criteria that you're going to use to evaluate from students. Share that with them in advance and show them example of assessment tasks, right, performance that meets, doesn't meet, or exceeds expectations. It's important, this fourth bullet point is super important. I struggle with it. I think everyone struggles with it. Try to return graded work promptly and record your grades in the grade book. right? Keep your gradebook up to date and don't consider using the Blackboard gradebook. Use the Blackboard gradebook because students can access it. So in addition to points and letter grades, provide as much additional feedback to students as possible. Tell them what they did well and what they need to improve on. So again, just some best practices for evaluating student work, including assessments and assignments. All right, a couple of years ago, ACTFL had a special summer institute and they generated 6 core practices. I'm just going to put these up on the screen and let you pause and take a look at them, okay? First one deals with staying in the target language 90% of the time, right? Second one is an emphasis on interactive interpersonal communication, okay? Third one has to do with backward design. Number 4, I don't have any idea what they're talking about. So number 5 has to do with, be sure to include interactive reading and listening tasks, right? And to use authentic cultural texts, right? And number 6 has to do with providing appropriate feedback in speech and writing. So a lot of this we've already covered in different ways, but these come from our professional association, ACTFL. I think the first one may be the most important one. Stay in the target language. All right, and then just some general things for our language classes in our program, right? Make sure your syllabus is clear. Now the syllabus is going to be given to you, right? And it will be clear and set out and easy to follow sequence, but stick to the syllabus. Don't go super far ahead and don't fall behind. If you're using a textbook, and you will be, make sure you explain to students how you want them to use it, right? What order you're going to follow, that should be clear, right? Which elements you're not going to use, because students appreciate structure, clarity, and consistency. You want to be familiar with the textbook, right? We're asking students to do a lot of preparation before class on their own, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be super familiar with the way the textbook presents materials, right? Because students are going to expect what you say to match what they've seen in the textbook. All right, make sure that your course objectives, assignments, assessments, etc., and your own expectations are realistic and consistent with appropriate targets for proficiency. They will be. We've already done this work for you, but it's just good advice. Be sure to design assessments and assignments that address each mode. So don't just do interpersonal communication. Don't just do speaking. Don't just do writing. Don't just do reading. You need a mix. And then we're going to close or end on this note. I think it's important. Spend time getting to know your students in the target language and learning more about how they approach learning so that you can adapt to their learning styles, right? Because a lot of today's students, right, learn differently than I did or you might have other past generations of learners. So get to know what they expect, what their learning styles are, and try to adapt to the extent possible. All right, well, those are the best practices that I wanted to recommend to you all. Believe me, they're tried and true. They work. They'll help you be more effective in the classroom and as you plan your lessons. That's the end of our video series for teaching assistants and per-course instructors. Thank you very much for your patience. Hopefully this has been useful. And like I mentioned before, if something wasn't quite clear, you'll have access to these PowerPoints. You can go back and watch the videos. And of course, we can clarify any questions you might have in our face-to-face orientation. Speaking of which, I hope to see you there. Hasta luego. Nos vemos. Ciao.